So these are the requirements and the step-by-step process the settlement agent takes in order to meet or remove the requirements prior to closing. You may hear us use the words cure title, clear title, but these are all the steps that we take in order for a policy to be issued. We call this meeting the commitments requirements. It does not refer to the title being clear. It just says, this is what we're taking care of. Because remember, we talked about those things that are going to stay on as exceptions. So keep in mind, too, that there are some things that aren't even going to be satisfied until the day of closing. There's also going to be some things that, you may never see on your commitment. So again, the clear to close, the execution and recordation of documents required for closing. So we may say we need to have the deed, we need to have the mortgage signed, we may need a corrective deed executed because somewhere along the chain of title, somebody didn't do their deed correctly. We're going to satisfy mortgages, first mortgages, HELOCs. We're going to release liens and judgments such as PACE financing. We might have to do a termination of a notice of commencement. There might be homeowners or condominium association issues and taxes and assessment. So if we go to the next slide and talk about documents for execution and recordation. So you can see that in this case, it says the following documents satisfactory to us, creating the interest in the land and or the mortgage to be insured must be signed, delivered, and recorded. So we're going to need a deed from Sam and Susan seller to Bob buyer, because that's what the contract said. Contract said Sam and Susan are selling to Bob. And we need a mortgage from Bob buyer as a single person, or if he's not single, joined by his spouse if married to the Bank of America. So again, in almost every situation, you're going to have some document that needs to be recorded. You're always going to need a deed to be recorded when you're doing a sale. If the buyer's taking out financing, you're going to have a mortgage that needs to be recorded on every transaction. So let's go to the next one, which is a mortgage satisfaction. So this is the language you can expect when there is an existing mortgage lien on the property, usually because the seller has previously taken out a mortgage. In this situation, a payoff from the lender that currently holds the mortgage will be obtained from the lender, and the payoff information will tell the settlement agent how much money the lender will require before it will cancel or satisfy its mortgage lien. So when you take the listing, please obtain the information for the first mortgage lender as well as any second mortgage lenders or home equity lines of credit. This will assist FAN in obtaining a payoff. Some lenders will require that the seller sign an authorization to release information prior to providing the payoff information. Remember that the settlement agent cannot close and disperse without a written payoff statement from all underlying lenders prior to the time of closing. Now, I want to throw in a little something here that we may be experiencing. Some of our sellers have gone through a forbearance during the COVID protocol, I like to call it because that's a cute word. So when you take a listing, ask your seller very nicely, did you do a forbearance with your first lender? That will help the settlement agent, because sometimes you're going to ask us if we can net out your seller, and we really don't know because we don't know your seller's not current. So we're going to get the principal balance maybe at a month's interest and give you a guesstimate for your estimate seller's net sheet, not knowing that the seller hasn't paid any payments for 6 months. And so all that interest is also going to be owed. So ask them very politely if they went through a forbearance, because that will help all of us when we want to change. Now let's look at a home equity line of credit or a HELOC. So a home equity line of credit is a line of credit secured by the seller's home that gives the homeowner a revolving credit line to use for large expenses or consolidate their debt. Many sellers do not understand that this is not a personal line of credit, but they have indeed executed both a note and a mortgage securing the debt. Whether or not they've ever used it, whether or not it has a zero balance, it must be closed out. So one of the things that I like to suggest is, if you know your seller has a home equity line of credit, tell them to go to the bank and close it out. They don't have to pay it off, but tell them go close it out so they do not use it again. We have had people use their home equity lines of credit the day of closing to buy something for their new home. And now we didn't even know we didn't have an adequate payoff. So they don't have to pay it off, but if you know they have a line of credit, go tell them to close it out so they don't use it anymore. They need to turn in their credit cards affiliated with their home equity line of credit, as well as any checks they have associated with that home equity line of credit. Okay, so PACE financing. I don't know if any of you have ever heard about PACE financing, but PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy Act. And PACE allows a homeowner to purchase energy efficiency products for their homes and finance it through their tax bill as a special assessment. Okay? Now there's some potential title issues with PACE. The first issue is the title search may not find the lien if they haven't recorded it yet. And if they've just done it, it's not going to show up on the next tax bill. Okay? So two key issues to remember. If it's brand new, it may not have been recorded yet. And secondly, because we pay our taxes in arrears, it's not going to show up on the next tax bill. So it's really important for you, if you go to list a home and you see that they've got new windows or new doors, shutters, it could be appliances, air conditioning, ask them very nicely, can you tell me how you finance that? And if they tell you, oh, I did it through this great program, it's called PACE, you want to tell them right then and there, they're probably going to have to pay it off at closing. Now, when people take out PACE financing, sometimes they are told it's an assumable lien and the buyer can just take over that payment. Unfortunately, that's not a true statement. So under PACE financing, it is only assumable if the buyer pays cash and wants to assume it. If the buyer is taking out a new loan, it must be paid in full because it is a super priority lien over the mortgage. So I'm going to say that again. If the buyer is taking out a mortgage, the seller must pay off that PACE lien because otherwise it would be a super priority lien over the buyer's new mortgage. PACE will not subordinate their lien, ever. If you do a short sale in the future, because there's been some questions as to whether or not we're going to see short sales. If you see a seller doing a short sale and there's PACE, PACE gets paid off before the short sale lender. So again, they have priority over everything except the IRS. So I don't know if you've experienced, Chris, any PACE liens out there, if you've had that issue come up in closings or not.
Occasionally, but very rare, based off of what we see.
Okay, and I will tell you that under House Bill 387, which becomes effective on July 1st, PACE is going to be offering more things that you can finance through PACE. So The state of Florida is very excited about PACE. I will tell you that Florida is one of only 3 states in the country that does PACE for residential property. Let's take a look at a notice of termination, a notice of commencement. So a notice of commencement refers to work being done on a property. So a general contractor will file a notice of commencement indicating that work has been started. Florida statutes have specific rules about the relationships among a property owner, the general contractor, and any subcontractors that work on the property. So in order to protect all the parties, the subcontractors who the property owner may not personally know, everybody must provide notice to the homeowner. So when we do a termination of notice of commencement, we're going to have an owner's affidavit identifying all the property who gave notice to the owner, a contractor's final affidavit together with his final waiver and the release of liens, and a termination of notice of commencement, and a final lien waiver and release from the general contractor. So any kind of work that's being done must have a notice of termination done before the buyer can get their new mortgage. Again, it would be priority over the new mortgage. Go to the next one, which is the corrective deed. So a requirement might show on your commitment there's an issue with the prior deed. And the commitment will advise exactly what needs to be corrected. And either the previous settlement agent or your settlement agent will have the corrected instrument re-executed, re-acknowledged, and re-recorded. And sometimes it's hard to find these missing people. So corrective deeds can be a real issue. If you get your commitment and you see a requirement for a corrective deed, you might want to say, gee, I wonder if this is going to delay my closing. Because how are we going to find these people? Now that we have social media, it seems to be much easier to find people. Don't you agree, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah, we can Google them, yeah. we can Facebook them, but still we've got to find them and get deeds corrected. Now, what if the deed was signed by somebody who's no longer alive? Oh boy, now we've got another issue. Or what if they don't want to sign a corrective deed? Now we've got another issue. We had a gentleman one time who said, yeah, he would sign a corrective deed. It would cost $5,000 to do it because he wanted to be paid for someone else's error. So corrective deeds can be an issue. If we go to the next one, which is judgments. And judgments and lien may appear in the title search against each of the sellers, and in order to remove the requirements, the seller must sign affidavits at closing, either saying they're not the person named in the judgments and liens, or if they are the debtors, then they're going to have to be paid off and satisfied in the public records. So it's up to FAN to make sure that the judgments and liens are not against the seller or to get the adequate payoffs. So we might prepare a non-ID affidavit or a not same name affidavit. It's really easy for people to say it's not them. So sometimes we really have to investigate to find out whether it really was or wasn't them. Generally on a judgment or lien, it's not going to show their social security number. So we're not going to be able to do it that way. We might have to find out, where have you lived and see if the judgment is any of those addresses. HOA or COA. So if you live within a homeowners association that has a planned unit development or within a condo, we're going to call for proof of payment of any and all homeowners association liens and assessments. And if you are in one of the communities where the association has to approve you, we're going to call for a certificate of approval to be recorded from the homeowners association or the condominium association. So we do know that we do have those. They're mostly condominiums. Taxes, we're going to require proof of payment of taxes and assessments for the current year and prior year, plus penalties or interest. Now we're going to get into one of my favorite subjects, which is municipal liens. So on your commitment, you're going to see this. It's going to say written evidence from appropriate governmental authorities that the special taxing district, city and county special assessment liens, MSBU assessment liens, impact fees, water, sewer, and trash removal, if any, have been paid. This refers to Chapter 159 and 170. So Chapter 159 and 170, water, sewer, utilities, taxes, and assessments. And in 2017, the FAR Bar Committee decided to change their contract, and it says, for purposes of this contract, a municipal lien search is a search that is done in order for the buyer's owner's policy to be issued without exception pursuant to Chapter 159 and 170. So I'm going to say that most of you have not read that, where they changed that in 2017. And I'm also going to say that probably most of you are not explaining this to your buyer. So again, they changed the verbiage. A municipal lien search now is just pursuant to Chapter 159 and 170. Not permits, not code enforcement violations. And you need to understand that there are three things that title insurance does not cover. We do not cover unrecorded municipal liens, unrecorded code enforcement violations, or open or expired permits. So again, we do not insure unrecorded municipal liens, unrecorded code enforcement violations, and open or expired permits. Those are contractual obligations, not title obligations.